Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every life, if one is fortunate enough to awaken, when the machinery of ambition grinds to a halt, a once burning desire to climb, to conquer, to prove, dissolves like mist under the rising sun. And what is left is not apathy, but a strange stillness, a silence that many mistake for depression, yet it is not. It is the soul, having touched the eternal, now hesitant to return to the trivial. You are not broken. You are not lazy. You have simply seen too much of the truth, and the truth does not inspire motivation in the conventional sense. It dismantles it. Before the awakening, we are unconsciously tethered to the roles we wear like second skins. These roles, crafted by the slow sediment of parental hopes, cultural values, media portrayals, and the subtle expectations of our communities, are not questioned, only enacted. We wake each day and slip into our costumes with practiced ease: the overachiever, the loyal friend, the obedient child, the rebel, the caregiver, the winner, the martyr. We identify so deeply with these masks that we forget they were ever chosen. To strive is to protect the mask. To win is to confirm it. And so our motivation, our endless drive to push forward, to climb higher, to outdo yesterday, is animated not by soul, but by persona. The persona, this curated projection of ourselves, is necessary in the early stages of life. It allows us to function in society, to communicate and connect, to survive, but it is a provisional identity. It is not the truth of who we are. It is the image we offer the world to gain acceptance, safety, admiration. And so long as we are fused with this image, we are filled with purpose, not because it is true purpose, but because the ego fears the death that truth brings. The persona is always performing. It feeds on praise and withers in the face of rejection. It is constantly editing itself, polishing, adapting, pretending, and this performance requires immense energy. That energy becomes what we call motivation. Motivation, in this context, is not a spontaneous spark of the soul. It is the fuel required to maintain the fiction. It is the will to keep the act convincing, to keep the audience clapping. When the persona is strong and well-fed, we feel motivated because we are deeply invested in keeping the mask intact. But when awakening occurs, when the light of consciousness pierces the carefully constructed illusion, the mask begins to crack. The persona can no longer hold. Its limitations, its falseness, its exhaustion becomes evident. And suddenly, the applause no longer matters. The race loses its meaning. The story collapses. This collapse is not a failure. It is a liberation. But in the beginning, it does not feel like freedom. It feels like loss. The scaffolding of your identity falls away, and with it, the structures that gave your life momentum. Without the familiar goals, the habitual comparisons, the urge to prove or impress, the machinery that once propelled you forward sputters and dies, and you are left standing in a stillness that is unfamiliar and unnerving. You are no longer sure who you are, and because of this, you are no longer sure what to do. The world around you keeps running on the old programs. People still speak in the language of ambition and hustle. They still seek the mask. They still worship at the altar of image. But you, having glimpsed something deeper, can no longer return to that theater. You can't make yourself care. You can't manufacture the old fire, and this is not dysfunction. It is the soul refusing to return to sleep. It is not laziness, it is grief. The death of the persona is a death of an entire worldview. And that death leaves a silence. This silence is where truth begins to grow. It is where the authentic self begins to stir. But that self does not emerge with fanfare. It does not shout. It does not demand. It waits quietly until you are ready to hear it. And until then, you may feel lost, unmotivated, uncertain. But this is the fertile ground of transformation. You are not broken. You are in the sacred space between masks. And what arises from this space will not be motivated by fear, status, or validation. It will be born of something older than ambition and truer than identity. It will not burn you out. It will not demand a performance. It will not be a mask at all. Before the awakening, motivation is often mistaken for passion, but in truth, much of it is driven by a deep, unconscious need to be seen, to be validated, to be worthy. We live in a world that rarely teaches us to turn inward for value, so we cast our sense of worth outward to the reactions, opinions, and judgments of others. We chase titles, achievements, appearances, and applause not because they satisfy something real within us, but because we believe they will reflect back a sense of significance we cannot yet find in ourselves. Every compliment, every nod of approval, every like and share becomes a mirror in which we hope to glimpse our worth. And in that pursuit, we are motivated, ferociously so. We hustle, we strive. We wake up early, push through exhaustion, suppress discomfort, and sacrifice presence, all for the chance to be validated, to be enough in the eyes of someone else. And yet, something happens in the moment of awakening. The mirror shatters, not because others stop reflecting us, but because we no longer seek our reflection in their gaze. We see through the game. We realize that no amount of approval ever satisfied us for long, that no accomplishment, no praise, no victory ever quieted the deeper hunger within. The applause always faded, the thrill always passed, the admiration always dissolved into the next task, the next pressure, the next expectation. And once that truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. Once the illusion of external validation is pierced, the entire system of motivation that was built on it begins to collapse. You may find yourself staring at the same goals, the same to-do lists, the same markers of success, but now they seem hollow, drained of their magic. The shine is gone, the hunger is gone, and without that hunger, the drive disappears. This is not depression. It is not failure. It is clarity. You are no longer willing to spend your life chasing carrots hung by invisible hands. You are no longer moved by the praise of people who do not truly know you, whose approval never fed your soul, only your image. You no longer wish to decorate the surface while the core remains untouched. The external world, with all its trophies and spotlights, begins to feel distant, irrelevant. It is not that you have given up. It is that you have finally seen through. You are beginning to understand that what once drove you was not desire, but desperation. Not love, but lack. And the moment that lack is exposed, it begins to heal. Not because you fill it, but because you stop feeding it illusions in this space. Motivation evaporates because the game is over. The rules don't apply anymore. You no longer care to win in a game that is rigged, whose prizes never satisfied, whose audience was never really watching you with love, only projection. You begin to see that those who once admired you did so because you mirrored what they wanted, not who they were. And you realize you have done the same, that most of what you chased was never truly yours. It was inherited, absorbed, unconsciously adopted. You feel the profound weight of this realization, and in that weight, movement ceases. The rush is gone, the fire cools. What remains is a strange emptiness, a quiet where your ambition used to live, but that quiet is not the end. It is the beginning of something far more honest. In that quiet, you are not being asked to motivate yourself again, to return to the old rhythms, to reignite the false fire. You are being asked to listen, to finally listen, to what remains when there is no one left to impress, no one left to become, no performance left to maintain, and no validation left to chase before awakening. The ego reigns as the central organizer of the psyche, structuring desires, plans, and motivations around a tightly woven identity that gives the illusion of control, purpose, and stability. The ego says, "This is who I am," and then constructs a life entirely around that assertion. It defines itself by profession, by relationships, by nationality, by gender, by experiences, and by preferences. It builds a fortress out of these identifications and calls it the self, mistaking a mask for a mirror. Within this framework, motivation thrives because the ego always wants more. More security, more recognition, more achievement, more certainty. Its hunger is never satisfied because it is built upon a fundamental illusion that what it accumulates will finally complete it. And so the individual wakes each day with a to-do list handed to them by the ego, thinking this forward motion is freedom, when in truth it is servitude masked as self-determination. But in the experience of spiritual awakening, something much deeper within begins to stir, a consciousness that is older than identity, untouched by biography, and indifferent to the ego's agendas. It does not shout or clamor for attention. It emerges softly, almost imperceptibly at first, yet its presence is undeniable. The awakening reveals that the ego, though clever and necessary in its own right, is not the whole self. It is only a part, and as this realization grows, the ego's tight grip on the psyche begins to loosen. Its goals start to seem arbitrary. Its ambitions, once intoxicating, now feel like distractions. Its sense of urgency begins to fade, not because life is less important, but because something more essential has come into view. This is the beginning of ego dissolution, and it is rarely peaceful. It can feel like the loss of the very center of one's being. What once animated effort and direction now feels unreliable, even false. The engine of motivation begins to sputter because the driver has changed. The ego, which once operated with certainty and control, now stands in the presence of the deeper self, the true source of being that has no interest in appearances, status, or linear progression. The self is not concerned with succeeding or failing in the eyes of others. It is not moved by praise, nor deterred by criticism. It seeks only authenticity, only wholeness, only truth. The dissolution of the ego brings with it a profound disorientation. The old motivations fall away not because you have lost your will, but because the will that once directed you was tethered to a false center. You no longer act out of a need to prove or protect a fragile identity. And in that absence, there is stillness. This stillness is not empty. It is vast, rich, and full of possibility, though it may appear barren to the ego's metrics of success. The self begins to guide, but its guidance comes not in commands or goals, but in subtle pulls, in quiet knowing, in deep resonance. It does not force or rush. It waits in this new orientation. Action becomes less about achievement and more about alignment. You act not to build a self-image, but to express an inner truth. What arises is not motivation in the traditional sense, but something more enduring, something like devotion or presence or a quiet inner yes. There is no longer the frantic need to be somewhere else, someone else, doing something else. There is simply the unfolding of being moment to moment, each act an extension of the inner reality rather than a strategy to manipulate the outer one. The ego's dissolution marks the end of willfulness and the beginning of willingness. You no longer chase outcomes, you listen for direction, you no longer strive to define yourself, you begin to uncover what was always there beneath the noise. And in that discovery, you find that what once motivated you was a response to fear. But what now moves you is rooted in something far more silent and far more real before awakening. The idea of progress functions like a sacred doctrine, woven deep into the fabric of modern consciousness. From early childhood, we are taught to measure our lives in milestones, each one a stepping stone to something greater, something more. Better grades lead to better schools lead to better jobs to better homes, and so on, each achievement a rung on the ladder of progress. We are told that life is linear, that meaning lies in advancement, that to stand still is to fall behind. This belief is rarely questioned because it is so deeply embedded in the collective psyche. It shapes our choices, our values, our sense of worth. Motivation, under this myth, becomes a moral imperative. If you are not moving forward, you are failing, but spiritual awakening tears through this narrative like lightning through a storm. The moment of awakening does not arrive as a promotion or a reward, but often as a collapse, a rupture in the forward, moving narrative. You begin to see that progress, as defined by the world, is built on comparison, on separation, on an endless striving that never ends. You look around and notice that those who have climbed the highest are often not the most fulfilled, but the most burdened, the most disconnected, the most desperate to maintain what they've gained. You start to understand that progress is not the same as growth. You begin to realize that your soul is not a ladder, and your worth cannot be measured by how high you've climbed. This realization is not intellectual. It is visceral. It strikes at the very heart of your identity, because so much of who you thought you were was tied to where you thought you were going. The roadmap you followed begins to dissolve, and with it, the destination you were striving for loses its meaning. You no longer believe in the prize. You no longer trust the path. And because of this, the energy that once surged within you to chase, to achieve, to improve begins to fade. The motivation that was once fueled by the promise of arrival loses its fire, because you now see that there is no final arrival, only the illusion of one. What replaces this belief is not apathy, but a kind of sacred disillusionment. You begin to see life not as a straight road with fixed endpoints, but as a spiral, an unfolding, a deepening. Progress becomes less about gaining and more about shedding, less about adding and more about uncovering. You become less concerned with how far you've come and more aware of how present you are. This shift is radical, and it dismantles the very engine that once drove your every decision. The thirst for status, the hunger for control, the compulsion to keep up, all begin to dissolve under the weight of a deeper truth in this space. External accomplishments no longer hold the same allure. The world continues to shout about success and goals and productivity, but the volume has been turned down. You hear it, but it no longer commands you. You are no longer seduced by the illusion that doing more will make you more. You are no longer convinced that there is something out there that will finally complete what has always felt incomplete inside. The myth of progress is exposed, and in its place arises the reality of presence, of wholeness, of returning to the moment rather than rushing toward a future that never truly arrives. And yet, this does not mean that you stop growing. It means you grow differently, from the inside out, not in pursuit of becoming someone, but in the quiet unraveling of everything you thought you had to be. You are no longer pulled by ambition, but drawn by authenticity. You are no longer trying to ascend some imagined ladder, but to descend into the truth of your own being. And in that descent, you find that the only progress that ever mattered was the journey inward, the homecoming to what was always waiting beneath the noise of becoming after awakening. Something shifts that cannot be undone. The frameworks that once shaped your sense of urgency begin to dissolve, and in their place arises a deeper awareness that sees through the surface-level narratives of purpose and ambition. The idea of living by inspiration, by sudden bursts of energy or creative fire, begins to feel insufficient. The soul, once it has tasted truth, no longer moves through the world seeking stimulation or adrenaline. It begins to crave something steadier, something more enduring than fleeting highs or externally manufactured goals. What once inspired you now often feels like noise, and what used to excite you now feels hollow, because the root of your being no longer seeks movement for its own sake. Instead, it begins to long for wholeness, for balance, for integration. Integration is not glamorous. It does not announce itself with bright lights or loud declarations. It is slow, quiet, inward, and often uncomfortable. It asks you to return to all the parts of yourself you had abandoned in pursuit of external success. It asks you to feel what you once ignored, to face what you once buried, to sit with what you once tried to outrun. This process is not fueled by the same energy that drove you before. It is not motivation as the world defines it. It is devotion, a steady willingness to remain present with the truth of who you are, even when that truth is raw or inconvenient or painful. Devotion is not about pushing forward, it is about showing up. Again and again, without the promise of reward or recognition in this space, you may no longer feel the pull to chase grand visions or lofty ambitions, not because you no longer care, but because your caring has transformed. It has deepened. It no longer needs to be proven or validated. You begin to care not in the way that requires you to be everything to everyone, but in the way that calls you to be honest with yourself. The fire that once drove you has turned to embers, and those embers glow with a different kind of warmth. They do not burn you out. They do not demand performance. They ask only that you remain close to your own experience, that you listen to what is real beneath the noise, that you honor the slow process of becoming whole. This kind of inner work often goes unnoticed by the world. There are no awards for shadow work, there are no medals for healing, there are no titles for the quiet reclamation of the self, and yet this is the most sacred labor there is. It is the foundation upon which true expression is built. When you choose integration over inspiration, you are no longer concerned with being impressive. You are concerned with being whole, and from that wholeness, new forms of action can emerge, action that is aligned, sincere, and sustainable. Not because you are driven by fear or the desire to prove yourself, but because you are moved from within by something that feels undeniably true. The world may continue to ask why you are not chasing what you once chased, why you seem so still, why the fire in your eyes has changed. And it has changed, it has matured, it has turned inward. You are no longer seeking meaning in the future. You are cultivating meaning in the now. You are no longer building a self for others to admire. You are dismantling the false self to make room for what is real, and this cannot be rushed. It cannot be forced. It does not respond to pressure or urgency. It unfolds in its own time through presence, patience, and the quiet courage to stay with yourself when every story of success has been stripped away. This is the essence of integration. Not chasing the light, but becoming whole enough to carry it. Not needing to be inspired to act, but being rooted enough to act from depth. Not looking for motivation to arrive from the outside, but listening for the small, steady voice within that already knows where to go and how to move without needing anything else to be more than it already is. After the awakening, there comes a moment when you begin to sense the immense stillness that lies beneath all things, a vast, quiet presence that does not rush, does not strive, and does not need to prove itself. At first, this stillness can feel like emptiness, like absence, like a loss of momentum. But as you rest in it longer, as you allow yourself to stop searching for the next thing to do or achieve, you begin to recognize its true nature. This stillness is not a void. It is not apathy. It is spaciousness. It is depth. It is the place from which all authentic movement arises, not because it is forced, but because it is true. And once you have touched this ground of being, once you have tasted its peace, the old way of pushing through life begins to feel foreign. Even violent, the stillness is alive. It is not the absence of life, it is life without distortion, and in this stillness, something shifts in your relationship to doing. You begin to realize that so much of what you once called purpose was actually a reaction. A reaction to fear, to expectation, to pressure, to conditioning. You were not acting from wholeness. You were reacting from fragmentation. Now, in this awakened space, that reaction no longer compels you. The old triggers no longer move you in the same way. The urgency that once lit a fire under your days begins to dissolve, not because you don't care anymore, but because you are finally learning to care from a deeper place, a place that is not reactive, not frantic, not consumed by the illusion that everything must be done at once or else it will all fall apart. Here, in this new rhythm, you discover something even more startling. You are not meant to be in constant motion. Life itself moves in cycles. There are seasons of bloom and seasons of retreat. There are moments of clarity and moments of obscurity. There are times to act and times to rest. But modern life, with its obsession with productivity, has trained you to override this natural intelligence. It has taught you to feel guilt when you are still, to feel shame when you pause, to feel lazy when you are simply being. After awakening, you begin to see through this programming. You begin to recognize that your value does not increase the faster you move, and your purpose is not fulfilled by how much you accomplish in a day. This realization is disorienting at first. You may find yourself resisting it. You may try to return to the old pace, to find the old motivation, to conjure the old energy, but it will not come. It cannot come, because the part of you that once ran on adrenaline and approval is no longer in charge. Something quieter is leading now, something softer but far more resilient, something that does not rush toward outcomes but listens deeply for alignment. This inner stillness becomes your compass. And while it may look like you are doing less from the outside, what is truly happening is that you are aligning your actions with your essence. You are no longer leaking your energy into what does not resonate. You are no longer scattering your attention across 1,000 false urgencies. You are conserving your inner fire for what truly matters, and this conservation may be misunderstood by those still caught in the storm of constant doing. You are not here to exhaust yourself. You are not here to endlessly prove your worth. You are here to live in harmony with your inner world, to let your presence become the foundation of your movement. And in doing so, you begin to embody a different kind of power. Not the power of force, but the power of truth, not the energy of striving, but the energy of presence. You begin to trust the pauses. You begin to allow the spaces in between. You begin to realize that what you thought was the absence of purpose is actually the doorway to a deeper, more authentic life, unfolding not from pressure, but from peace. So if you find yourself without motivation after awakening, do not despair. You are not falling behind, you are falling inward. You are not stuck, you are standing at the threshold of the real. Let the fire die, let the ashes fall. Something more ancient is awakening in you. You are not here to hustle. You are here to remember, and what you remember will guide you home. Thank you.